There was a time when every Sunday morning in Britain smelled of roasting meat and Yorkshire pudding, when the clatter of teacups marked the rhythm of daily life, and eel pies were served with pride on the streets of London. These weren't just meals, they were moments that defined a nation. But as decades passed, as convenience replaced ritual and traditions gave way to time-saving shortcuts, many of these beloved foods quietly disappeared. What once brought families together now survives only in fading memories and old recipe books. In this episode, we're turning back the clock to rediscover 5 famous British food traditions that have all but vanished from modern life. From the comforting aroma of Sunday roast carried to the baker's oven, to the shimmering bowls of jellied eels that once fed London's working class. This is the story of the Britain we remember and the meals that made a home. Let's begin with a Sunday ritual that united the nation, one roast at a time. There was a time when the smell of roasting beef didn't come from a home oven. It came from the neighborhood bakery. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, before most British homes had reliable ovens, Sunday was more than just a day of rest. It was a community ritual built around the family roast. Families would prepare their cuts of meat, potatoes, and vegetables early in the morning, carefully wrapping them in pans or cloths. Then, on their way to church, they'd drop the entire meal off at the local bakery. While families attended Sunday service, the baker would fill his oven, already hot from the morning bread, with trays of family roasts. Afterward, the same families would return, carrying home steaming pans of perfectly cooked meat and golden brown potatoes. The streets would fill with the mingling aromas of beef drippings, roasted carrots, and Yorkshire pudding, a shared scent of togetherness. The Sunday roast wasn't just a meal. It was a symbol of stability and community. It marked the one day when families could sit down together, no matter how hard the week had been. The local bakeries played a central role, not only feeding families but fostering a sense of neighborhood unity. Every roast that came out of those ovens carried the same warmth of home, even for those who didn't have one big enough to cook in. The tradition began to fade after World War II, as modern gas and electric ovens became standard in British homes. The bakers' ovens went quiet on Sundays, and that collective ritual, families chatting as they carried home their dinners, slowly disappeared. What was once a simple act of community, cooking became a private affair, tucked behind closed kitchen doors. But while the Sunday roast found its place in history books, another tradition, once a symbol of working-class London, was beginning to slip away beneath the tides of time and taste. It was a dish born from necessity and made from the Thames itself. Before fish and chips became the nation's go-to comfort food, there was another dish that ruled the streets of London, a shimmering bowl of jellied eels. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the River Thames was not just a waterway, it was a lifeline. For London's working-class families, eels were one of the few reliable and affordable sources of protein. They were plentiful, easy to catch, and could be preserved without refrigeration. The East End's markets and docks became famous for serving eels in every form imaginable, stewed, mashed, or jellied. To make jellied eels, the fish were chopped, boiled, and cooled until their natural gelatin created a firm, jelly-like texture. It was simple, nutritious, and filling, a poor man's delicacy born out of necessity. By the Victorian era, eel and pie shops had sprung up across the East End, offering cheap meals that fueled entire neighborhoods of dockworkers and laborers. For generations, jellied eels were more than just food. They were a symbol of East End resilience. The dish carried the taste of survival, reflecting a time when nothing was wasted and every part of the city's resources were used. Families passed down recipes, and eel stalls became gathering places where stories, songs, and laughter were shared over steaming bowls of the gelatinous treat. But as London modernized, the Thames grew polluted, eel populations declined, and tastes began to change. By the mid-20th century, the tradition was fading fast. Today, only a handful of authentic eel and pie shops remain, serving a dwindling generation of loyal patrons. What was once a working-class staple is now a nostalgic relic, a taste of a London that's slowly disappearing beneath glass towers and global chains. Yet while the eel shops of London were closing their doors, another beloved ritual, one that revolved around teapots, cakes, and the ticking of the afternoon clock, was quietly fading too. There was a time when 6 o'clock meant one thing across Britain: the clatter of cutlery, the steam of hot tea, and the comforting smell of bread and butter. It was high tea hour, the evening meal that fed a nation. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, before dinner parties and takeaways became the norm, high tea wasn't the refined affair we imagine today. It wasn't dainty cakes and bone china. It was a hearty, working-class meal. The name high didn't refer to elegance, but rather to the tall tables it was served on, as opposed to the low, parlor-style tables of afternoon tea. High tea was a full evening spread: strong black tea, thick bread with butter, cold meats, pickles, jam, and often hot dishes like eggs or fish. After long hours in factories or on farms, British workers gathered with their families to eat, rest, and share stories about the day. It was practical, filling, and deeply communal, the kind of ritual that made every household feel grounded. High tea mattered because it wasn't just about food, it was about rhythm and togetherness. The evening tea hour anchored the day, bringing order to working-class life during an era of rapid industrial change. It also reflected pride, the idea that even a modest home could offer a warm meal and a strong cup of tea after a long day's work. For many families, it was the one daily luxury they could afford. As the 20th century progressed, work hours shifted, families scattered, and convenience replaced ritual. The tradition of high tea quietly dissolved into memory. Today, the phrase high tea has been rebranded for tourists as a fancy afternoon treat, a far cry from the sturdy, no-nonsense meal that once sustained millions. In losing high tea, Britain didn't just lose a meal, it lost a daily moment of unity. And just as the teapots cooled and the high tables emptied, another cornerstone of British comfort began to fade: the humble pie and mash shop, once the beating heart of old London. Before burgers, kebabs, and fried chicken filled the high streets, there was one place every Londoner knew: the pie and mash shop. It wasn't just a meal, it was an institution. Pie and mash shops began appearing in London in the early 19th century, during the height of the Industrial Revolution. They were simple, affordable, and hearty, feeding the dockworkers, factory hands, and costermongers who kept the city running. The dish itself was humble: minced beef pie, mashed potatoes, and a thick green parsley sauce known as liquor. On Fridays, when meat was avoided for religious reasons, eels, stewed or jellied, took the spotlight instead. These shops were more than eateries. They were social anchors in London's working-class neighborhoods. With tiled walls, wooden benches, and steaming plates, they offered warmth and comfort to those who could afford little else. Generations grew up on the same familiar flavors, served with the same pride by families who ran the shops for decades. The pie and mash shop became a symbol of East End identity: honest food for honest work. It was cheap, filling, and served with no pretension. For many, it represented the very essence of London: tough, practical, and proud. The recipes rarely changed, and that was the beauty of it. You could walk into any pie and mash shop and know exactly what you were getting. But as the 20th century moved on, London began to change. Redevelopment swept through old neighborhoods, and the new generation turned toward faster, more modern foods. One by one, the family-run pie and mash shops closed their doors. Today, only a handful survive, cherished by loyal regulars who remember a time when pie, mash, and liquor weren't just a meal, but a taste of belonging. And while the scent of parsley sauce and beef pies faded from the streets, another British culinary tradition, one that simmered slowly in every home, was also slipping quietly into the past. There was a time when every British kitchen had one thing in common: a pot bubbling gently on the stove, filled with a pudding that wasn't sweet at all, but hearty, steaming, and made to last through hard winters. The boiled pudding was once a cornerstone of British home cooking. Long before ovens became common, families relied on large pots hung over open fires to prepare their meals. From this simple setup came the suet pudding, a mixture of flour, fat, and whatever scraps of meat, vegetables, or fruit were available. Wrapped in cloth and boiled for hours, it emerged dense, flavorful, and filling. A meal that could sustain a family when times were tough. There were savory versions like steak and kidney pudding for the main course, and sweet versions like spotted dick or jam roly-poly for dessert. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the pudding became a national symbol of comfort and resourcefulness. Even during wartime rationing, puddings adapted, made with breadcrumbs instead of flour or dried fruit instead of fresh. Boiled puddings represented more than food. They were family rituals. Making one took time, patience, and care. Mothers taught daughters how to tie the pudding cloth just right so it wouldn't leak. The slow simmering filled the home with warmth and smell, a sign that something special was coming. For generations, puddings were served at Sunday dinners, Christmas feasts, and humble weekday meals alike. But as modern ovens took over and convenience foods filled supermarket shelves, the art of the boiled pudding quietly disappeared. The long hours it demanded no longer fit modern life. Today, most people know pudding only as a dessert, not the labor of love it once was. Yet for those who remember, the sound of a pot lid rattling gently on the stove brings back a flood of memories of family, patience, and a Britain that once took pride in making things the slow way. And just like that, as the kitchen fires dimmed and time marched on, a nation that once celebrated its humble table began to forget the dishes that defined it. Once upon a time, Britain's kitchens were more than places to cook. They were the heart of the home, where stories, laughter, and lessons simmered alongside every meal. Each of these dishes, from jellied eels and hearty meat pies to the Sunday roast and the simple boiled pudding, tells a story of resilience, creativity, and love. They remind us that food isn't just about flavor, it's about people. About the mothers who stretched a few ingredients into a feast. The grandfathers who carved roasts while telling old war stories. The families who gathered around small wooden tables and made the best of what they had. These meals connected generations, binding them with shared rituals and familiar smells. And though many of these recipes have slipped quietly into the past, their spirit still lingers. In every pub that still serves a hand-crimped pie, in every grandmother who still remembers how long to steam a pudding, and in every kitchen that values time, patience, and togetherness over convenience. Because history doesn't just live in books or museums. It lives in our kitchens, in our hands, and in the memories we pass down through food. If you enjoyed this journey through the forgotten flavors of Britain's past, take a moment to subscribe and join us again as we rediscover the meals, memories, and moments that shaped who we are. This is the taste of history, the Britain we remember.